Hello everyone, welcome to part 3 of this weird little series where I ramble about D&D puzzles. It could very well be finished after part 2, as by then I managed to understand and explain the problem I had with D&D puzzles, namely that most of them aren't puzzles at all, speaking in game design terms, but I'm still making a part 3, because I have a bunch of unorganized notes left after writing scripts for these two videos and I don't want to waste them. As such, this video will be even more rambly than the previous ones, so we better get started immediately. And let us start with a puzzle that I have seen in a few places online and have been personally subjected to twice. As the party enters the room, the door shuts behind them. The only noteworthy features of the room are a pedestal in the middle, which has a button on it, the exit door on the other side, also closed, and the countdown above that door slowly going down. Pressing the button resets the timer and that's all. There is absolutely nothing you can do besides pressing the button. And absolutely nothing is precisely what you need to do. As the moment the countdown reaches 0, both doors open and the party is free to continue. Some versions also have things that end up acting as red herrings, such as lights flickering and going out as the timer counts down to put the players on edge, or the pedestal being surrounded by a magical well which enchants party's weapons, suggesting that they might be necessary to open the way forward. So what do I think about this puzzle? Well, for starters, it's not a puzzle, but a riddle, going by the definition I gave in the second video. The challenge comes from guessing the goal, not the execution. I'm not the biggest fan of riddles to begin with, and my problem with this one boils down to the fact that a riddle becomes rather pointless if you already know the solution, especially a riddle whose whole purpose is to trick the players. Something like this only works once, or not at all, which was the case for me, as I've seen this riddle in a Zibashu video first, and then later encountered it as a player in 2 different D&D groups. And sure, the idea itself is clever, playing with the players' expectations of what a countdown can mean, and with the fact that doing nothing isn't something people usually consider as a way to get past an obstacle. But if you already know the twist because you've seen a video with well over 1 million views, or searched for D&D puzzles online, or apparently read through Tomb of Annihilation, I've seen someone say that there's a room like that in there, but I don't feel like looking through the whole book just to try and confirm or deny it. Anyway, if you know the twist, what is there to do? Try doing things you know won't work? Metagame and tell the rest of the party to let the timer run out? You just sit quietly and let other players try to figure it out, knowing full well that you're losing session time each time the button is pressed? And even if you don't know the answer, I can't imagine this being all that fun, though I can't even speak on that from personal experience, let alone from an objective standpoint. But I do think it's a risky riddle to use. Depending on your players, you might get laughs, you might get frustration, because you spend all this time trying everything you could think of, and then it turns out that not only nothing you tried worked, but each thing actively made the situation worse by prolonging it. This actually reminded me of a similar concept with the point of trolling the players, where as the players enter the room and the doors close behind them, the ceiling starts going down, threatening to crush them. There are alcoves in the walls or holes in the floor which can provide shelter, but only to just about half of the party. Over time, the ceiling gets closer and closer, forcing the characters who didn't manage to fit in the safe zone to lie flat on the floor. And then it stops, and slowly returns to the original position, the way forward opening. I like this one much more, though it's neither a puzzle nor a riddle. It can become a problem if your players have ways to shrink themselves, meld into stone, hide in bags of holding, or otherwise feed more people in the safe zone than it would be otherwise possible. But whether they do or not, this room can be tied into the rest of the dungeon if you're having it themes of faith or sacrifice or anything of the sort. Perhaps if some characters willingly decide to give away the chance to stay safe to others in the party, they might later be rewarded for that. But going back to the riddle, can it be improved? I'm not sure. I have a few ideas, but I don't know how good they are. For starters, you could try reskinning it, so it's not instantly recognizable for people who have encountered it before. But also, do something about the player options, because they will of course try everything before letting the counter go all the way down, and I'm not sure if the frustration that creates is the good kind. Again, I can't really tell myself, because I knew about it beforehand. Also, you could maybe make it so the timer doesn't go back to 10, or whatever you have as the starting number, but to 1 less each time. No idea if that would be better or worse. Maybe just subvert it in some way. You will catch people who recognize it off guard, and the rest don't know what's supposed to happen anyway. But I don't know how you would do that, and I do not care about this so-called puzzle. And okay, that was a bit negative, so how about a puzzle I recently encountered which caught me off guard so much that even now as I think about it makes me chuckle? Meet Sentinel, the Warforged Paladin, my newest D&D character. In a recent session, as he went into a complete low power mode, closer to a sleep than the regular sentry's rest, he received a vision, and within that vision, a message. The DM then said that he's not sure how well this will work as a puzzle, but he will read the message out in the language it's in. I got ready to write down whatever it was going to be, and then I heard 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. Binary was the last thing I expected, and turns out I'm not great at transcribing it from hearing it spoken, as I got lost quite a few times even after the message was read out twice. But another player managed to get it almost perfectly, so I didn't have to try and reconstruct the message, though I was ready to give it a try if need be. The thing about this kind of puzzle is that it's very specialized. Most people would recognize that this is binary, and given the complete transcript of it, they could plug it into a binary to text translator. Though that would reduce the puzzle to just correctly writing down the sequence. But for me, it was perfect. Because not only I'm a game developer, but I'm also someone who, for fun, taught himself binary and logic gates in primary school. So, I was equipped with the knowledge necessary to solve it by hand. Separate the sequence into segments of 8 digits each, translate the numbers to base 10, and then, referencing an ASCII table, get letters out of these numbers. And it's not the only puzzle I was given that I was expected to solve out of session, as in the same group, in a campaign run by a different DM, after finding a puzzle sphere made by a long extinct civilization, I was handed a cryptogram, which, admittedly by accident, was constructed in a way that allowed it to be mostly solved with deduction instead of random guesses, analyzing the letter frequency or trying to brute force it with a solver, effectively making it into an actual puzzle. This is what it looked like. The fact that the first sentence is a question is a great hint, since after some searching you can find out that out of the question words, only which seems to fit, as it has to be a 5-letter word with the second and fifth letter being the same. This in turn reveals that the second word starts with an I, so it can only be is. Which is something question, followed by 3 words, the middle one having 2 letters, implies an or comparison. And if we have a comparison, the third word should be an adjective ending with er. The 2 words of the second sentence both start with the same 2 letters, and the structure of the first one strongly implies that the second of these letters is a vowel, with the only remaining options being U and A, though that doesn't give you anything concrete. I think that at that point you have to guess greater, which makes magic an easy guess, and that in turn makes machines easy. And I guess I should probably justify including these 2 puzzles in the video, beyond just I mentioned them in the notes I'm going through. Well, you could say that they show how you can give your players a difficult puzzle at the end of a session, allowing them to think on it in between sessions, thus having more time for other stuff when the session time comes. There is one more puzzle I encountered while playing with this group that I want to bring up, because it was a fun twist on how puzzles and riddles tend to be combined in D&D. Approaching the gate to the home of the ice giants under the mountains, we found it locked, and alongside it an empty basin and a faded inscription. If memory serves, someone made an int check to get 2 or 3 words filled in, and then we had to deduce what other words would make sense in the context. Which eventually resulted in a riddle, the solution to which was a list of things we should do to gain entry. And that's why I wanted to bring it up. I've seen a number of puzzles where the rules are hidden behind a riddle. This is the only time I've seen a riddle revealed by solving a puzzle, and that was at least a part of what made it memorable. So, don't be afraid to experiment with mixing puzzles, problems and riddles. People might be more willing to overlook the things they don't enjoy as much if there's something they do enjoy also present to keep them occupied. Yeah, that could be the advice here, I guess. Good enough. On that note, easy puzzles can be great as a part of a problem. Say you have buttons scattered around the room, as well as hints that when put together indicate the order they should be pressed in. Things like, the golden button must be pressed before the silver one, the stone button needs to be pressed second, etc. By itself a very easy puzzle, just collect all the information you can and perform a simple deduction. But now do it all during combat. where you have to sacrifice positioning and action economy in order to go over to the appropriate buttons and press them. Puzzles mid-combat might not be a bad idea in general. The one downside of combat is that for most of it you're only a passive participant, making saving throws, taking damage, and if you're lucky you'll get to use a reaction. Sure, you still need to pay attention to what's going on, but once you know what you're going to do on your next turn, all you can do is wait. But if you give your players a puzzle that they can chip away at in the meantime, that could give them something to do other than just becoming distracted by the first out-of-game thing they see. Maybe. It's just a thought I had. I never actually tried something like that. You can also mix puzzles with exploration. If you're using dungeon maps, consider false walls. Have players find a fragment of the dungeon's map, which initially doesn't seem to fit with any part of the dungeon they passed through, no matter how it's rotated. And it's possible that they haven't yet discovered the relevant part of the dungeon, but when they do, and find a part that fits, it will only fit partially, showing a secret passage in the given part of the dungeon. It might be a more interesting way of revealing secret paths through the dungeon rather than just having players roll to have a look around in every single room. And if you're not using maps, you can still do something interesting with an exploration-based puzzle, taking inspiration from adventure games. The one I will use as an example is One Shot, because it's a fantastic game that you really should play if you haven't. And if you started, but haven't finished it for some reason, despite constant inquiries about it, then you know who you are and you better get to it. Anyway, One Shot has some classic adventure game puzzles, as well as some more unique four-wall breaking ones, but it's the former I want to focus on. These puzzles have the classic structure of find things, then use them on each other and the environment until something works, which in some games can be rather arbitrary, though I've found them to be fairly logical in One Shot, and I would hope that the same would be the case for your campaigns if you choose to use this style of puzzle. But what I specifically wanted to bring up in relation to these puzzles is an in-universe justified way of making whatever items you want to use distinct. Since in D&D you don't have the option to click on every pixel on the screen to see if it's something you can use. That way is to make these items magical, giving them some common item equivalent property or just magically resilient. This way, you can make them stand out in any ancient dungeon where their surroundings decayed, but these items remained unchanged. And even when surrounded by items in a similar state, this can still work just as well if someone in the party has detect magic. But since I brought up One Shot, I wanted to try coming up with a puzzle that breaks the fourth wall too. It's definitely not something you see often in D&D, since it's immersion breaking by very nature, but being unexpected can make it more memorable. I just realized that every four-wall breaking puzzle I can think of is actually more of a riddle. Which, now that I think about it, I suppose it's a given. The act of breaking the fourth wall isn't difficult to perform, it's just not something you consider as an option. Discovering a puzzle on the other side of the fourth wall is possible, but the puzzle itself won't be anything special because of that. So let's move on to other things. For some loose pieces of advice, consider not locking the players in a room with a puzzle. If you show them the puzzle necessary for progress, but also other paths that they can take in the meantime, you are allowing your players to take a break at any moment, or take time to think on the puzzle while still making progress elsewhere. When designing your own puzzles, you can make them lighter on rules if you use the things that players intuitively understand. It's something Legend of Zelda does quite well. If there are dry vines, spider webs, or unlit torches, setting them on fire is a good call, especially if a source of fire is present nearby. Symbols of ice on the walls are likely where you're supposed to redirect light beams if you have any in the room. Pipes are presumed to have something flowing through them, with valves or levers on straight segments most likely opening and closing the way, while on three-way segments they can change the direction of the flow. Also, use whatever you're skilled at to design puzzles. If you studied music, for instance, you are far better equipped to design a puzzle based on it than someone like myself. And in turn, I'm quite well equipped to make a programming-inspired puzzle, or perhaps one involving numeric systems or logic gates. And I have no way of knowing what it is that you're good at, but if you try hard enough, you can probably make it into a puzzle. Just remember that the players are most likely less knowledgeable on that topic than you are, so you need to adjust the difficulty appropriately. And the best piece of advice I can give is to steal ideas. Steal puzzles from puzzle games. Steal from these videos. Steal from other people's videos. Steal them from Pokémon gyms if you feel like it. Designing a puzzle from scratch can be difficult, but it is considerably easier to find a pre-existing puzzle, understand how it works, and modify it slightly, so that the players familiar with the original can't just solve it instantly. The same applies to popular logic puzzles. Take something like the Tower of Hanoi, or the river crossing puzzle, or the water pouring one. Give it a twist, and you're good to go. And I would design an example of how it can be made, but I don't have to, because Knights of the Old Republic already did it for me. And while not every twist needs to be as complex as giving separate rules to every element of the puzzle, this does get the point across. And also in the same vein, basic games with an added twist. If everyone knows how to play the basic version, and you can finish that in under 5 minutes, then throw an extra rule or two into the mix and you're good to go. Make Fantasy Connect 4, Fantasy Tic-Tac-Toe, Fantasy Battleships, Fantasy Minesweeper. Make the opponent a golem guarding a treasure chest on the orders of some long-dead wizard. Or make the enemy moves happen by themselves, because magic or clockwork. Or rework it into a single-player game. Or a cooperative one, where the players aren't all sharing the same turn. Here's an example for what that could look like. When the party entered the dungeon, each felt a tingle at the back of their right hand, finding a strange mark there, a glowing rune representing one of the 4 classical elements. These runes would interact with gemstones located in different rooms of the dungeon, affecting the rooms or specific elements in them in a way dependent on the element associated with the character who touched them. They also give the players their respective cantrips: Shape Water, Control Flame, Gust, and Mold Earth. Now, after entering another room, they find themselves facing 4 elementals, one of each type. And between the 2 groups, there is an arrangement of the elemental crystals, like a cross with connected corners, or perhaps a 3x3 grid rotated 45 degrees. The crystals emit a magical wall, which stops the party from progressing. Once the whole party is inside, the first of the elementals walks towards the crystals, touches the leftmost one, leaving a mark of fire on it. It then walks back to stand in a row with the other elementals, and gestures towards the party, inviting them to play. From there, the party takes turns with the elementals trying to form a 3 in a row of any elemental symbol, with the elementals always moving in the same order. Let's say fire, air, earth, water. The players can act in any order they want, though you could give the limitation that all the players have to move once before anyone can make their second move. A symbol can be placed into any empty crystal, or onto one that has a symbol of a weaker element in a cycle. Fire on air on earth on water, and water on fire. This is a mechanic that probably should be introduced early in the dungeon, but if it wasn't, you can have it introduced here by making one of the elementals make a move like that. Another thing you could do is make it an additional win condition if you can make it impossible for the opponents to make a move. If the party is victorious, the elementals disintegrate before them, and the wall disappears, granting passage. If the players are defeated, the wall goes down all the same, but the elementals are still present and immediately attack the party. The last thing I wanted to bring up in this video is a set of puzzles I started designing for a big dungeon in a small campaign I'm running. There, the players are exploring a giant gnomish war machine, a walking clockwork castle, which is hostile to them, and went into lockdown after they broke into and took over the main command room. Because of this, every single door is blocked, and the lockdown needs to be overridden on each of them individually, which is of course done through a puzzle, otherwise I wouldn't be bringing it up. The base rules of the puzzle are simple. There is a grid of pegs and blocks, also containing 2 gears. A silver one, which is spinning on its own, and a golden one, which stays static, with an arrow on it. Various gears found throughout the dungeon are used to connect the silver and gold gears. And once the gold gear is spinning, in a specified direction, the door nearest to the solved board opens. Gears can be removed from solved puzzles, once again locking the doors they held open, and allowing them to be reused elsewhere in a dungeon. As players explore and fight, they will find more and more gears of different types. Starting with versatile but sometimes inconveniently shaped 1x2s, then over time collecting also 1x1s, 2x2s and 3x3s, allowing them to explore more and more, making it so these are not only easy puzzles that make the dungeon a little more varied, but they also turn the dungeon into something like a Metroidvania, where exploration rewards you with ways to explore even more, sometimes requiring backtracking. To make things more interesting, I also designed 3 special gears, belonging to some high-ranking personnel of the war machine. A large 3x3 gear which spins on its own, a 3x1 gear which can pass through blocks on the board, and a pair of linked 1x1 gears. No matter their position in relation to one another, if one is spun, the other spins in the opposite direction. These 3 gears must be found in order to solve a gauntlet of 3 puzzles, which are otherwise impossible, and which block the path to the final secret of the dungeon. And while I have yet to actually run this dungeon for my group, I think it's at least a conceptually good example of how you can create a dungeon-wide series of puzzles based on a single concept. And yeah, that's it for my notes on this topic. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I was making sense. I'm not yet sure what my next video will be, but it will be related to either D&D or wider game design and development. So subscribe if that sounds interesting, and until then, bye!